Entitled sister cheated on with my boyfriend, got pregnant, and my entitled mom took my sister's side, planned a shotgun wedding, then cut me out of their will for not supporting or attending the wedding. But I got the last laugh. I met him when I was a starry-eyed freshman, barely figuring out life on my own. He was the senior who had it all: confidence, a good head on his shoulders, and this ability to make you feel like the only person in the room. Back then, it felt like a goddamn fairy tale. I didn't think twice when he told me he'd left college a few years earlier to help his dad's business before coming back to finish his degree. If anything, it made him seem more grounded, more real. We were together for 2 years. 2 effing years of my life where I thought I had everything figured out. The late night talks, the shared plans for the future marriage, maybe kids someday, but only after we'd both built careers we were proud of. He was my first serious relationship, and I believed in us. God, I was an idiot. I introduced him to my family after a year of dating. I was proud, like, look at the amazing guy I found. My parents seemed to like him well enough. My mom, ever the overbearing matriarch, had her usual nitpicks about him not being polished enough. But my dad, he seemed impressed that my boyfriend had helped his family business. Even my little brother thought he was cool. And my sister, well, I didn't notice it then, but looking back, there were signs. She was 18 at the time, all bright-eyed and giggly every time he was around. She'd ask him way too many questions: what he studied, what kind of music he liked, whether he could help her with some project for school. I thought it was innocent, like a kid looking up to someone older and cooler. God, I was blind. Fast forward another year, and life started getting weird. He'd started making more trips back home to see his parents. 2 or 3 times a month, he'd be gone for a weekend. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? He told me he was helping his dad wrap up loose ends with the business, and I bought it. Hook, line, and effing sinker. The truth came crashing down on me one evening when my sister pulled me aside, crying. I thought something horrible had happened, like she'd been in trouble or hurt. Instead, she dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. And guess who the father was? Yeah, my boyfriend. I can't even describe the feeling in that moment. It was like someone ripped my stomach out and shoved it into a blender. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could hear was her blubbering excuses: how he'd started visiting her months ago, how it just happened, how she didn't mean to hurt me. Hurt me? She effing destroyed me. And him. The bastard had the audacity to act like it wasn't a big deal. He didn't even deny it. It's complicated, he said. Complicated. Complicated is forgetting an anniversary or mixing up schedules. This was betrayal on a level I didn't even think was possible. You'd think my mom would have my back, right? She'd tear into them for screwing me over. Nope. Her big concern was the family's goddamn reputation. We can't let this get out, she declared, like it was some PR crisis for her to manage. She slapped my sister, sure, but within hours, she was already planning how to fix it. And her solution? A shotgun wedding. My sister, 18, barely turned 19 years old, marrying my 27-year-old boyfriend to keep their bastard baby from being born out of wedlock. I walked out of that house that night and never looked back. Part 2. I didn't just walk out of that house that night, I stormed out like the place was on fire. My boyfriend screwing my teenage sister behind my back. My sister sitting there crying like she was the victim. And my mother? Oh, my effing mother. She sat us all down like it was some twisted family meeting to figure out next steps. The next steps, apparently, didn't involve any kind of justice or consequences for those two. Nope. Her genius idea. A goddamn shotgun wedding to fix things. My sister was 19, barely out of high school and knocked up by a guy who'd been calling me his soulmate 2 weeks ago. But in my mom's mind, the baby was the priority, and I was just collateral damage. I barely made it back to my apartment before I broke down. I was screaming into a pillow, throwing whatever I could get my hands on, just trying to get the rage out of my system. But no amount of yelling or breaking tht could take away the hollow ache in my chest. It was like someone had ripped my heart out and replaced it with a ticking bomb. And then the calls started from my mom. You need to be mature about this. Mature? Are you effing kidding me? She wanted me to be mature, while she was busy rewarding betrayal with a goddamn wedding. The final straw came when they told me about the inheritance. Half of what was supposed to be mine, from my grandparents, was going to bankroll their little white picket fence nightmare. My mother made it sound so reasonable, too, like she was doing me a favor by leaving me anything at all. I know this is hard for you, sweetie, but think about the baby. We have to give them a good start in life. F that. F the baby. F all of it. That's when I decided to air the dirty laundry they were so desperate to hide. If they wanted to keep their skeletons in the closet, too bad I was about to blow the goddamn door off. I opened Facebook and went to town. I wrote out the entire sordid story, sparing no details. How my boyfriend had been sneaking around with my sister while pretending to be in love with me. How my mother was orchestrating a wedding to save face. How half of my inheritance was being stolen to fund their new life. I even attached screenshots of texts between my ex and me, where he admitted to being torn, but ultimately chose my sister. The fallout was immediate. The post went viral within hours, and my phone blew up. Some people were horrified and supportive, messaging me to say I deserved better. Others, the flying monkeys from my family, called me out for humiliating my sister and dragging private matters into the open. One relative actually had the nerve to say, "You're better than this." Better. What part of this situation gave them the impression that I needed to take the high road? My mother was livid. She left me a voicemail that started with a shriek and ended with her calling me jealous, bitter, and ungrateful. The ungrateful part almost made me laugh. Like I was supposed to be grateful that she was screwing me over to play savior to my cheating ex and my sister. Of course, I didn't go to the wedding. The very idea of sitting in some church pew, watching them play Happy Family, made me want to vomit. But my absence didn't go unnoticed. My mother took the opportunity to spin her narrative to anyone who would listen. Apparently, I didn't attend because I was too jealous of my sister getting married first. Can you imagine? Like my heartbreak and betrayal boiled down to some petty rivalry over who walked down the aisle first. It was disgusting, and worse, some people actually believed it. The only person in my corner was my younger brother. He was 20 at the time and still living at home, so he saw everything. He called me after the wedding, apologizing on behalf of the circus we were born into. "They're nuts," he said bluntly. "Mom's acting like this is some Jane Austen novel, and Dad's just letting it happen. I don't know how you're dealing with this, but I'm here for you." His support meant everything. He was the only one who didn't try to guilt me or gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting. Still, the isolation was brutal. I blocked my parents, my sister, and anyone who tried to drag me back into their mess. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me unpack the anger and grief. But the betrayal left scars I couldn't ignore. For 2 years, I built a life that had nothing to do with them. I climbed the ladder at work, made new friends, and finally started to feel like I could breathe again. Then my dad died. Part 3. When I found out my dad died, my first reaction was nothing. Just this weird, empty numbness. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't feel much of anything. After everything that had gone down, he was just another piece of my past I'd buried. Someone who stood by while I was gutted and betrayed. But grief is a messy bee, and it hit me later in waves I wasn't prepared for. My younger brother called to tell me the news. He didn't ask if I'd come to the funeral. He just told me I should. Said it'd be for me, not them. I wasn't so sure. Did I really owe that man anything after the way he'd folded under my mom's pressure? But there was still this tiny part of me that wanted closure. Maybe even some proof that he'd cared in his own f-ed-up way. Against my better judgment, I went. The funeral was as fake and suffocating as I'd imagined. Everyone was there, the same relatives who had taken my mom's side and swallowed her jealousy narrative whole. I could feel their eyes on me the second I walked into the church, whispering behind their programs like I couldn't hear them. I kept my head up and ignored the murmurs. My brother stuck by me, and to my surprise, so did my uncle, Dad's brother. He pulled me aside before the service started and said, "I know you've been through hell. Don't let them make you feel like you don't belong here. Your dad was proud of you, no matter what it might have seemed like." That hit harder than I expected. Proud. Proud of what? I'd cut ties with the family and barely spoken to Dad in years. What was there to be proud of? The actual service was a blur. My mother was front and center, dressed in black and sobbing dramatically, clutching a tissue like she was auditioning for a soap opera. My sister sat beside her, visibly pregnant again, because of course she was. And the cheating arsehole. He looked awkward as hell, like he couldn't figure out where to look. I stayed in the back, keeping my distance. I wasn't there to reconnect or make amends. I was there to pay my respects and leave. But then came the will reading. I hadn't planned on sticking around for it, but my brother insisted. He'd heard something from our uncle, something about how Dad might have done right by me in the end. I didn't believe it, not after everything, but curiosity got the better of me. The lawyer read through the usual legal mumbo-jumbo before getting to the good part, the asset division. Mom looked smug as hell, sitting there like she already knew the score. My sister, sitting beside her, wasn't even trying to hide her anticipation. And then the bomb dropped. 40% of Dad's estate, almost half, was left to me. The rest was split between my mother and my brother, with a small trust set aside for my sister's kids. There was nothing specifically for my sister, which made her face twist into something truly unholy. But that wasn't the best part. The lawyer handed me a sealed letter from my dad. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it gutted me in a way I wasn't ready for. He apologized for not standing up for me when everything went to SHT. Said he'd been weak, afraid of rocking the boat, but that he'd always admired my strength. He mentioned how I'd helped out with the mortgage on their house when I got my first real job, and how he wanted me to have what was rightfully mine. I was too stunned to say anything. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to someone in that family. Like maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Of course, my sister lost her goddamn mind. "She doesn't deserve any of it," she yelled, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "This is bullshit. Dad wouldn't have wanted her to have more than me." The lawyer calmly explained that Dad's wishes were clearly documented and notarized. But that didn't stop her tantrum. She turned to me, her face red with fury, and spat. "You're so effing selfish. You're ruining everything, like always. Always." Like she hadn't been the one to blow up my life in the first place. My mom wasn't much better. She didn't scream, but the look she gave me was pure venom. Later, she pulled me aside and tried to guilt-trip me into doing the right thing. "You don't even need the money," she hissed. "But your sister has 2 children to think about now. How can you be so heartless?" I stared at her, completely done. "How can you be so blind?" She made her bed. Let her lie in it. I'm not giving her a single effing cent. The will stood as it was. My sister threatened to challenge it in court, but that went nowhere fast. The lawyer had receipts for every decision Dad had made, and she didn't have a leg to stand on. I thought that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. My sister started harassing me a few weeks later. First, it was just angry texts and voicemails. Then she slashed my car tires. The final straw was when she broke into my apartment while I was at work and trashed the place, leaving a note that just said, "You owe me." I called the cops. They caught her on camera leaving the building, and when they questioned her, she actually admitted to it. Claimed she was hormonal and desperate. She ended up with a hefty fine and a restraining order. But you know what the kicker is? My mom praised her for taking the blame to protect her husband from legal trouble. Apparently, he was in on it too, but had a cleaner record. This family never effing learns. Part 4. Cutting my sister out of my life was easy. She'd burned every bridge, destroyed every ounce of goodwill, and made it clear she'd stop at nothing to drag me down with her. Blocking her number, securing my apartment, and refusing to engage was like shedding a heavy, toxic weight I'd carried for far too long. But my mother, that was harder. Even after everything, some part of me still wanted her approval, her love, her acknowledgement that what she'd done to me was beyond cruel. I waited for an apology, a hint of regret, something, anything. But it never came. Instead, she doubled down. She kept calling, leaving voice calls full of guilt-tripping bullshit about how family is all we have, and your sister needs your help. At one point, she even tried showing up at my job, but security turned her away. My brother told me she was telling everyone I was cold-hearted and selfish, spinning the narrative as if I was the villain. It hurt, but it wasn't surprising. The truth is, my mother's pride would never let her admit she was wrong. She'd rather watch her golden child destroy herself than admit she failed as a parent. And my sister. She was more than happy to play the victim, feeding off that toxic dynamic like it was oxygen. For a while, I felt trapped in this cycle of anger and pain, like I couldn't move on no matter how hard I tried. Therapy helped. My therapist called it grieving the family I wanted but never had. And yeah, it was a effing process. It wasn't all bad, though. My brother was a rock through everything. He stuck by me, visited me often, and reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. He eventually moved out of the family house and into his own place, cutting ties with our mother and sister after one too many blow-ups. Watching him find his own strength gave me hope. I poured myself into my career and built a life I could actually be proud of. I traveled, made new friends, and learned to trust people again slowly, but surely. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. But every now and then, I'd hear about them. My sister ended up having her second kid, but things weren't exactly sunshine and rainbows. Her husband, my ex, if I can even call him that anymore, wasn't doing great financially. And their relationship was as toxic as you'd expect. My brother told me they were always fighting, always struggling. But my mother still coddled them like they were the second coming of Christ. It was like watching karma work in slow motion. Part of me wanted to laugh, but another part just felt sad. Not for them, they made their choices, but for the years I lost trying to please people who never gave a damn about me. One day, my sister reached out. She sent me this long, rambling email about how she was sorry for everything, how she was struggling, and how she hoped we could start fresh. She even threw in a line about how the kids would love to meet their aunt. I stared at that email for a long time before deleting it. There wasn't anything left to say. As for my mother, I haven't spoken to her since my dad's funeral. I think about her sometimes, wondering if she ever regrets pushing me away. But I've made peace with the fact that I'll never know. Life goes on. It's not perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough. People like to talk about how family is everything, how blood ties are unbreakable. But that's bullshit. Family isn't about DNA. It's about love, respect, and trust. And when those things are gone, what's left? Obligations? Guilt? Screw that. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away, even if it feels like ripping your own heart out. Because at the end of the day, your peace is worth more than any forced connection. Do I still wonder if they'll ever face real consequences for what they did? Sure. But I've learned to stop waiting for karma to do my dirty work. My revenge is simple. I'm happy, successful, and free from their toxicity. And that's more than enough. TLDR. My ex-boyfriend cheated on me with my 18-year-old sister, got her pregnant, and married her with my family's support. My parents took half of my inheritance to fund their new life, and tried to guilt me into forgiving them. I exposed everything on social media, cut ties, and moved on. But my sister and mother kept trying to drag me back into their drama. Years later, my dad's will gave me 40% of his estate, which my sister tried to contest, leading to more harassment. My sister was fined and hit with a restraining order after breaking into my home. But my mother still enabled her. I cut them all out of my life, focused on my career, and found happiness on my own terms. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.